Before we go any further, if you value serious evidence-based history that goes beyond surface-level myths, subscribe to After the Sirens right now and leave a comment as you watch. This channel is built for historians, survivalists, and critical thinkers who care about how ancient knowledge actually worked and why it still matters today. For centuries, Vikings were portrayed as brutal raiders who survived the cold through sheer toughness. That narrative is convenient, but it hides something far more unsettling. The Norse developed a heating and insulation system so efficient that later medieval armies and kingdoms deliberately downplayed it, because admitting its effectiveness would have meant admitting they were technologically outmatched in the harshest environments on Earth. This was not folklore, and it was not primitive luck. It was applied thermal engineering. When Viking armies moved through frozen landscapes, they did not rely on open fires or constant fuel consumption. They relied on a controlled, concealed heating method built directly into their structures and camps. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavia, Iceland, Greenland, and the Danelaw reveals longhouses that maintained stable internal temperatures even during brutal winters, using a system now known as the Norse hypocausts-adjacent hearth and smoke channel design. The core of this system began beneath the floor. Viking longhouses were constructed with stone-lined central hearths that extended below ground level. These hearths were not simply pits for fire. They were thermal reservoirs. Heat absorbed by stone and compacted earth was slowly released over many hours. Instead of losing warmth through smoke and open air, Vikings redirected it through carefully carved channels beneath raised wooden floors and along interior walls. This created radiant heat that warmed the entire structure evenly without filling the space with smoke. What made this system especially dangerous from a military perspective was its invisibility. From the outside, a Viking winter camp appeared dormant. There were no towering smoke plumes, no obvious heat signatures, no constant movement to feed fires. Enemy scouts assumed inactivity or weakness. In reality, warriors inside were warm, rested, and ready. This passive heat retention meant less fuel use, fewer supply runs, and far lower detection risk. Later, medieval armies, particularly those operating in Northern Europe, avoided documenting or adopting these methods publicly. Records emphasize Roman hypocausts while ignoring Norse innovations, despite clear evidence that Viking systems were better suited for mobile warfare and temporary occupation. Roman hypocausts required permanent stone buildings and massive labour. Viking heating worked in timber structures that could be built, abandoned, or dismantled rapidly. The design principles were deceptively simple but required precision. Floors were raised just enough to allow airflow but not enough to lose heat. Walls were layered with turf, wood, and animal hides, creating insulation comparable to modern passive houses. Roofs were steep and heavy, trapping rising heat while shedding snow. Smoke exited through small vents rather than large chimneys, preventing heat loss while maintaining breathable air. You know, this mattered in warfare because cold kills morale before it kills bodies. Armies without thermal control burned through fuel, exhausted their men, and became, well, predictable. Viking forces could overwinter in hostile territory without revealing their presence. That strategic advantage explains why later chroniclers focused on Viking savagery rather than their engineering. Acknowledging the technology would have meant rewriting the balance of medieval military intelligence. This knowledge is not just historical, it's immediately applicable even today. Survivalists can replicate Viking heating principles using stone, earth, and airflow management without electricity or modern materials. A partially buried hearth built with stone and clay, combined with a raised sleeping platform, can maintain livable temperatures through thermal mass alone. Even a small shelter, honestly, can benefit from heat channeling along walls rather than venting warmth straight upward. In practical terms, this means building low, wide fires that heat material rather than air. It means insulating with layered organic materials instead of relying on constant combustion. It means controlling airflow so oxygen feeds the fire without pulling heat away from the living space. These are not abstract ideas. They are documented techniques that kept Viking families alive through Arctic winters and allowed armies to move when others, well, froze in place. Modern experimental archaeology has, confirmed this effectiveness. Reconstructed Viking longhouses consistently maintain temperatures far above ambient levels, even after fires are extinguished. The heat lingers because it was stored, not wasted. This principle is now central to passive solar and thermal mass architecture, yet its roots are rarely credited to Norse innovation. The reason this knowledge faded was not because it failed, but because centralized states preferred systems that required infrastructure and control. Viking heating empowered mobility and independence. That was dangerous. Armies tried to hide it after the war because it undermined the narrative that civilization flowed only from Rome and the South. The cold North was not backward. It was ahead. Understanding this honestly changes how we see Viking society. These were not reckless marauders surviving by force alone. They were engineers of environment, masters of energy efficiency, and strategists who understood that warmth is power. The cold was not their enemy. It was their weapon. If you are serious about history, survival, or understanding how ancient knowledge still outperforms modern assumptions, this is why After the Sirens exists. Subscribe now. Share this video with someone who still thinks Vikings just suffered through winter, and comment below with your thoughts or questions. The past still has lessons we are refusing to learn.